The Google Story, by David A. Vise and Mark Malseed. Introduction. On a sunny California morning in 1998, two young men, barely out of their teens, sat on the front porch of a suburban house. They were Ph.D. students who had stumbled upon an idea so big, so audacious, that the biggest tech companies of the day had all told them it was worthless. They had run out of money. They were running out of time. In a few minutes, a silver Porsche would pull up, and out would step a legendary Silicon Valley investor named Andy Bechtolsheim. The two young men, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, didn't have a business plan. They didn't have a PowerPoint presentation. They just had a clunky, homemade computer server built partially out of Legos and a belief that they had found a better way to organize the world's information. After a short demo, the investor, without much negotiation, took out his checkbook and wrote a check for $100,000. He made it out to a company called Google Incorporated. There was just one small problem. Google Incorporated didn't exist yet. The story of Google isn't just the story of a search engine. It's the story of what happens when two brilliant minds decide to have a healthy disregard for the impossible. It's a lesson in how a simple, powerful idea, when protected with ferocious determination, can change the fabric of our daily lives. This book, The Google Story, takes us inside the garage, inside the boardrooms, and inside the minds of the two founders who were told their idea was a $1 million project, only to turn it into one of the most valuable and influential companies in human history. By the end of our time together, you'll understand the secret sauce behind their meteoric rise. You'll see how a philosophy of don't be evil can be both a guiding star and a source of immense conflict. And you'll learn the principles that allowed two kids who loved to argue to build an empire that, for better or worse, now touches nearly every aspect of our modern world. This is more than a business story, it's a blueprint for thinking bigger than anyone else believes you can. Book summary. Our story begins not with a brilliant idea, but with an argument. In the spring of 1995, at Stanford University, a quiet, contemplative Midwesterner named Larry Page was visiting as a prospective graduate student. His guide for the day was a confident, outspoken, and slightly younger math whiz named Sergey Brin. From the moment they met, they disagreed on just about everything. Each found the other completely and utterly obnoxious. But beneath the surface, there was a shared language. Both Larry and Sergey were, as the author calls them, second-generation computer. They weren't just kids who grew up with computers, they grew up in them. Larry's father was a pioneer in computer science and artificial intelligence at Michigan State University. His mother taught computer programming. Sergey's father was a math professor at the University of Maryland, and his mother was a scientist at NASA. In their homes, intellectual debate wasn't just encouraged, it was the main form of entertainment. They were raised to question everything and to vigorously defend their ideas. So, what looked like an argument to outsiders was, for them, a familiar dance. It was a way of testing ideas, of pushing boundaries. And that constant intellectual sparring soon blossomed into one of the most powerful partnerships in modern history. At the time, the internet was like a massive, chaotic library with no card catalog. It was a digital Wild West. Early search engines like Alta Vista or Excite were clumsy. They would simply count how many times a word appeared on a page. If you searched for car, you might get 1 million results, with a random personal blog appearing higher than Ford's official website. It was frustrating, and for researchers like Larry and Sergey, it was a problem that needed solving. Larry, who was always dreaming up massive, seemingly impossible projects, came up with an idea that made his advisor laugh. He said, "I'm going to download the entire World Wide Web." He thought it would take a week. It ended up taking over a year. But in the process of crawling through the billions of links connecting all those pages, he had a breakthrough. He realized that in the academic world, the importance of a research paper is often measured by how many other papers cite it. A paper with thousands of citations is a landmark, a paper with none is forgotten. Larry wondered, what if the links on the web worked the same way? What if a link from one page to another was a vote of confidence? But he took it one crucial step further. Not all votes are created equal. A link from a highly respected site, like the New York Times homepage, should be worth far more than a link from a random, unknown blog. This elegant, simple idea was the secret sauce. He called it PageRank, a clever play on his own last name and the web pages he was ranking. Sergey, with his expertise in data mining, was immediately fascinated. Together, they built a primitive search engine in their dorm rooms and offices at Stanford, using scavenged computer parts and a server rack they constructed from Legos. They called it Backrub, because it analyzed the backlinks pointing to a website. It worked. In fact, it worked so well that it quickly became the talk of the Stanford campus. It was faster, smarter, and more relevant than anything else out there. They knew they had something special. But their dream wasn't to build a company, it was to finish their PhD.S. So they tried to sell their PageRank technology. They went to Alta Vista, the king of search at the time. The executives were polite, but ultimately passed. They had a not invented here attitude. Google's technology was an outside idea, and they weren't interested. Then they went to Yahoo, another giant of the era. But Yahoo's business model was different. They wanted to keep users on their site as long as possible, browsing directories and clicking on ads. Google's technology was designed to do the opposite, to get you off Google and to the right answer as fast as possible. Yahoo's co-founder, David Filo, gave them some advice that would change their lives. He told them, if you really believe in this, don't sell it. Go start your own company. It was a terrifying thought. They were academics, not businessmen. But every door had closed. They were, as they saw it, reluctantly forced into becoming entrepreneurs. This is where the story takes a legendary turn. With their Stanford project consuming more and more of the university's bandwidth and their credit cards maxed out, they needed funding. A professor arranged a meeting for them with Andy Bechtolsheim, a co-founder of Sun Microsystems and a legendary angel investor. The meeting was set for 8 a.m. on a friend's front porch in Palo Alto. Larry and Sergey, feeling the pressure, quickly pulled up a demo of their search engine. Bechtolsheim was in a hurry. He typed in a few searches. He saw the speed. He understood the elegance of PageRank. He didn't need to see a business plan or a financial projection. He saw the magic. He said, "This is the single best idea I have heard in years." Then, he told them he had to run to his next meeting and started writing a check. He made it out for $100,000 to Google Incorporated. Larry and Sergey were stunned. As I said, Google Incorporated didn't technically exist. They had to quickly file the incorporation paperwork just so they could deposit the check. For the next 2 weeks, that check sat in Larry's desk drawer. With Bechtolsheim's endorsement, they raised about $1 million from family and friends, including an early investment from a man named Jeff Bezos, who was busy building his own little online bookstore called Amazon. They officially took a leave of absence from Stanford, rented a garage from a friend named Susan Wojcicki, who would later become the CEO of YouTube, and hired their first employee, a fellow grad student named Craig Silverstein. The Google story had officially begun. That first $1 million allowed them to buy more computer parts and expand their network, but they quickly realized they needed a lot more money to truly scale. This led them to the intimidating world of venture capital on Sand Hill Road. They decided to approach the two most powerful and competitive firms in Silicon Valley, Kleiner Perkins, led by the famous John Doerr, and Sequoia Capital, led by Michael Moritz. Typically, a startup would be lucky to get money from one of them. The two firms were bitter rivals and almost never invested together. But Larry and Sergey had a bold, almost arrogant strategy. They decided they wanted them both, or neither. They figured if both firms were co-investors, neither could dominate the board. It was a way to take the money while keeping control. The venture capitalists hated the idea. Both Dorr and Moritz wanted to be the sole lead investor. The deal almost fell apart multiple times. But Larry and Sergey held firm. They were willing to walk away. They knew that the greatest fear of a venture capitalist is not losing money, but missing out on the next big thing. In the end, they got their wish. The two rival firms agreed to jointly invest $25 million into Google. It was an unprecedented deal. But it came with one very important condition. Dorr and Moritz insisted that the two young founders, brilliant as they were, needed adult supervision. They had to hire an experienced CEO to run the business side of the company. This was the last thing Larry and Sergey wanted. They had fought so hard to maintain control. They interviewed candidate after candidate, intentionally making the job seem as unappealing as possible. They didn't want a bean counter coming in and ruining their creative, chaotic, university-like culture. But the investors were relentless. Finally, John Doerr brought in a man named Eric Schmidt. Schmidt was the CEO of a software company called Novell and had previously been the chief technology officer at Sun Microsystems. He was a computer scientist himself, with a PhD from Berkeley. He had even been to Burning Man, the quirky desert festival that Larry and Sergey loved. Their first meeting began with Sergey attacking Schmidt's business strategy at Novell, calling it stupid. Schmidt, instead of being offended, argued back hard. For 90 minutes, they went back and forth, debating and challenging each other. By the end, Schmidt was energized. It was the best argument he'd had in years. And for Larry and Sergey, they had finally found an adult who could speak their language. It took months of negotiation, but in 2001, Eric Schmidt officially joined Google as CEO. The leadership was now a triumvirate, Larry as president of products, Sergey as president of technology, and Eric as the CEO in charge of scaling the business. This unique power-sharing structure would guide Google through its most explosive period of growth. So, they had the leadership, the funding, and the best search technology on the planet. But one question still lingered, a big one: how were they going to make any money? Their initial plan was to license their search technology to other companies, but that had failed. For a long time, Larry and Sergey were deeply opposed to advertising. In an early academic paper, they wrote that ad-funded search engines were inherently biased and that a reliance on ads would corrupt the purity of their search results. This was the birth of their famous motto, "Don't be evil." But reality began to set in. They saw a company called Goto.com, later Overture, that had a clever model. They allowed advertisers to bid on keywords. The highest bidder for the word shoes would have their ad appear at the top when someone searched for it. It was effective, but to Larry and Sergey, it felt a little dirty. The highest bidder wasn't necessarily the best or most relevant result for the user. So, they decided to take that idea and give it a Google twist. They would also have an auction for keywords, but the ranking of the ads wouldn't just be based on who paid the most. It would be a combination of the bid price and the ad's relevance, which they measured by how many people actually clicked on it. This was a genius move. More relevant ads got more clicks, which meant more money for Google and a better experience for the user. They also made a crucial design choice. The paid ads, which they called sponsored links, were clearly separated from the pure search results. They were kept in a box on the side of the page, so as not to pollute the core product. This system turned Google from a brilliant technology into a money printing machine. It created what the author calls the Google economy, Thousands, then millions of small and medium-sized businesses that could never afford a TV commercial could now reach a global audience by paying just a few cents per click. It was a self-service, democratic, and incredibly scalable model. By 2002, Google inked a massive deal to become the search provider for America Online AOL. Overnight, Google was introduced to 34 million new users. The trickle of revenue became a fire hose. By 2004, the company was so large and had so many employee shareholders that, by law, they were forced to do what Larry and Sergey had dreaded for years: go public. They were determined to do it their way. They hated the traditional IPO process, where Wall Street investment banks would underprice a stock and give shares to their favorite clients, who would then flip them for a quick profit on the first day of trading. It felt corrupt. So they opted for an unconventional method called a Dutch auction, where the price would be set by the bidders themselves, and anyone, from a massive institution to an individual Google user, could participate. They also created a dual-class stock structure, giving themselves shares with 10 times the voting power of normal shares. This ensured that even as a public company, they would retain absolute control over Google's destiny. In a letter to their new shareholders, they laid out their philosophy, famously borrowing a phrase from investor Warren Buffett: "We won't smooth quarterly earnings." They declared that they would always prioritize long-term innovation over short-term profits. "Google is not a conventional company," they wrote. "We do not intend to become one." The road to the IPO was a circus. Their unorthodox approach angered Wall Street. There were SEC investigations. And in a moment of terrible timing, an interview they had given months earlier was published in Playboy magazine, just weeks before the offering, a potential violation of the SEC's quiet period. The press had a field day. It seemed like the celebrated IPO might fall apart. But on August 19, 2004, Google finally went public at $85 a share. Within a year, the stock price had soared to over $300. Larry and Sergey, the two grad students who couldn't sell their project for $1 million, were now billionaires many times over. And with that flood of cash and public attention, Google entered a new era. The race was on. Microsoft, the sleeping giant, finally woke up. Bill Gates, seeing Google hire engineers with the exact same skill sets as Microsoft's, realized they weren't just a search company. They were a software company, and they were coming for his empire. What followed was an all-out war for talent. Google opened an office right in Microsoft's backyard near Seattle and began poaching top engineers. The most high-profile battle came when Google hired Drive Kai-Fu Lee, a top Microsoft executive, to lead their new operations in China. Microsoft sued, and Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's CEO, reportedly told an employee who was leaving for Google, "I'm going to fucking kill Google." The fight over China highlighted Google's first great moral compromise. To operate a search engine within China, they had to agree to the Chinese government censorship rules. For a company with the motto "Don't be evil" and a mission to make all the world's information universally accessible, this was a painful decision. They created what Eric Schmidt called an evil scale and decided that providing some limited information was better than providing none at all. But it tarnished their image and showed that in the real world, their idealistic motto would be severely tested. At the same time, they were innovating at a blistering pace, fueled by a principle they had established early on: 20% time. Engineers were encouraged to spend 1 day a week working on any project that interested them. This wasn't just a quirky perk, it was the engine of Google's growth. Google News, the automated news aggregator, was born from a 20% project by an engineer named Krishna Bharat, who was frustrated trying to find information on September 11 from multiple sources. Frugal Now Google Shopping was another. But the most controversial and world-changing product to come out of this period was Gmail. When Google announced Gmail on April 1, 2004, everyone thought it was an April Fool's joke. They were offering 1 gigabyte of free storage, which was 500 times more than what Microsoft offered. It was so ridiculously generous, it seemed impossible. But it was real. And it came with a catch. To make money, Google's computers would automatically scan the content of users' private emails to serve them contextually relevant ads. A public firestorm erupted. Privacy advocates were horrified. Lawmakers threatened to ban it. It was the first time the public began to view Google with suspicion, not as a friendly, helpful tool, but as a big brother that was reading their mail. Larry and Sergey were completely blindsided. To them, it was just an elegant engineering solution. It took them a long time to understand that the world didn't always see things through the logical, unemotional lens of a software developer. Despite the controversies, Google's dominance grew. They acquired a small video-sharing startup called YouTube for $1.6 billion. They launched Google Maps, Google Earth, and began the monumental, and legally fraught, project of digitizing every book in the world's great libraries. But the biggest bet was yet to come. It was an idea that went back to Larry Page's childhood, growing up near Detroit. He had always dreamed of a better transportation system. In 2009, Google secretly launched what they called Project Chauffeur. Its goal: to build a fully autonomous, self-driving car. This project was the ultimate moonshot. It represented the company's evolution from organizing information to using information and artificial intelligence to solve the world's biggest problems. The self-driving car project eventually graduated from Google's secretive X Lab to become its own company, Waymo. The stakes were so high that when a star engineer, Anthony Levandowski, left Google and allegedly took 14,000 confidential files with him to a new company that was quickly acquired by Uber, Google filed a massive lawsuit. The case revealed a dark underworld of corporate espionage in the race to build what could become a trillion-dollar industry. To manage all these far-flung ventures, from self-driving cars to Calico, a company trying to solve death, Google restructured itself in 2015. They created a new parent holding company called Alphabet. Google, the search and advertising engine, became just one subsidiary, albeit the one that funded everything else. Larry Page became the CEO of Alphabet, focused on the big picture, while a trusted lieutenant, Sundar Pichai, took over as CEO of Google. The story ends where it began, with a healthy disregard for the impossible. From a dorm room at Stanford to a global behemoth grappling with antitrust lawsuits, government censorship, and the ethical dilemmas of artificial intelligence, Google's journey has been anything but conventional. It's a testament to the power of a single question that Larry and Sergey asked themselves over and over again: is this the best way to do this? And if not, can we build something better? Commentary. When you step back and look at the story of Google, it's easy to get lost in the dizzying numbers, the billions of dollars, the trillions of searches. But I think the real magic of this story lies in a few simple, powerful ideas that are just as relevant to a 17-year-old figuring out their path as they are to a CEO of a major company. The first, and maybe the most important, is that phrase Larry Page picked up in college: having a healthy disregard for the impossible. Think about that. Not an unhealthy disregard, not a foolish ignorance of risk, but a healthy one. It's the ability to look at a problem that everyone else says is too big, too complex, or too expensive, and to quietly think to yourself, I think I see a way. Downloading the entire web was impossible. Building a search engine in a dorm room that could beat multi-million-dollar companies was impossible. Taking on Wall Street and winning was impossible. At every step, they were fueled by this belief that the conventional limits didn't have to apply to them if they could find a smarter, more elegant solution. The second lesson is their relentless, almost fanatical focus on the user. When they were trying to sell PageRank, Yahoo turned them down because Google's technology was too good. It sent people away from their site too quickly. Larry and Sergey saw that as a feature, not a bug. Their entire philosophy was built on the belief that if you do what's right for the user, if you give them the fastest, most relevant answer, they will trust you and they will come back. The money, they believed, was a secondary problem that would eventually solve itself. In a world that is so often focused on short-term gains, that long-term vision is a powerful reminder of where true value comes from. And finally, there's the idea of the 20% time. This wasn't just about letting smart people play. It was a deep understanding that innovation can't always be planned in a boardroom. It has to be grown. It bubbles up from the bottom. By giving their brightest minds the freedom to explore their curiosities, they created an engine for accidental discovery. Gmail, Google News, AdSense, some of their most profitable products, were born in this space of creative freedom. It's a profound lesson that the most valuable breakthroughs often come not when we are trying to solve a specific problem, but when we are simply following our curiosity. So, what can you take from this today? First, start your own 20% project. It doesn't have to be a world-changing technology. Spend one afternoon a week learning to code, writing a story, building something with your hands, or diving deep into a topic that fascinates you for no other reason than you want to know more. Don't worry about where it will lead. Just follow the spark. Second, in whatever you do, adopt a user-first mindset. Whether it's a presentation for school, a project for a club, or a simple conversation, ask yourself, what is the best possible experience I can create for the person on the other end? That single question can elevate everything you do from average to exceptional. The story of Google is a reminder that the world is, and always has been, shaped by small groups of people who decided that the way things are is not the way they have to be. They are not superheroes. They are curious, driven, and sometimes, as their story shows, a little bit naive. But they believe in the power of a great idea, and they have the courage to protect it, to nurture it, and to see it through, even when the whole world is telling them it's impossible. That was the book summary of the Google story by David A. Vise and Mark Malseed. We've certainly covered a lot of ground today, hitting the major milestones of this incredible journey. But I'll be honest with you, a summary can really only show you the map. The real adventure happens when you travel the road yourself. The magic of a book like this is in the details, the late-night arguments, the near failures, the small moments of genius that can't possibly fit into a summary. This overview is designed to help you decide if this story is one you want to spend more time with. If anything we've talked about today sparked your curiosity or inspired you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning business history, it's about experiencing the mindset that built the modern internet. And that's a journey well worth taking. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to continue exploring the ideas that shaped our world, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.